She wrote him a letter every month for 16 years. Rain or drought, planting or burying, every month the same short walk to the same station, the same folded page pushed across the same counter. And every month it went out into a country that had no address for the dead. 16 years. Not one of those letters ever came back with a word on it. Not one was ever answered. The town had a name for her behind her hand, the woman who writes to the desert, and they weren't wrong exactly. They just didn't know the whole of it. Because here is the thing nobody in that town could have guessed. The thing I didn't guess myself until a dust-colored stranger stood in my doorway one evening with a peach pit in his fist, and a story no sane man would believe. All those years she was writing letters that couldn't be delivered, she wasn't the only one. Somewhere out past everything she knew, someone else was doing the exact same thing, writing into the fire, sending words to a person he couldn't name, and the two of them were writing toward each other the whole time, and neither one ever knew. Stay with me, because the day her letters finally got answered, the answer didn't come the way she'd prayed for. It came 16 years late, carried by a dying man who had no reason on this earth to make the trip, and it changed what I thought I understood about mercy and about grief, and about the strange, stubborn ways love finds its way home when every road is closed. This is a true feeling story of endurance, of a mother who wouldn't quit, and of an old man who crossed a desert to keep a promise. Let me tell it the way it happened to me. I keep a book, always have. My father kept one before me on a different road in a different territory, and I suppose it's the one thing of his that took. Every soul that stops at Dry Fork gets a line in it. Name, if they'll give it, direction they're headed, condition of their animals, whether they paid or promised. I write it all down in a ledger with a cracked spine, and I can't sleep. I mean truly cannot close my eyes until the day's entries are done and the ink is dry and the book is shut and set square on the corner of the counter where it lives. My wife, when I had one, said it was a sickness. Maybe. A man out here at the far dry edge of the territory needs some proof that people came through, that the day happened, that he wasn't alone in it the whole time. The book is my proof. 16 years of proof. So when the stranger filled my doorway that evening, the first thing my hand did before my mind caught up, before I even thought about the rifle leaning by the flour barrel, was reach for the pencil. He came out of the last of the light. That hour when the desert goes the color of a struck match, and the Ocotillo throws shadows 40 feet long, and everything looks like it's been dipped in blood and then wrung out. I heard no horse. That should tell you something right there. Nobody crosses that country on foot at that hour and lives to knock, but there he stood, and there was no horse, and the dust on him was so thick and so old it had gone past dirt into something closer to a second skin. An old man, Apache. I knew that the way you know weather. He filled the door and he did not come in, and for a long moment we just looked at each other across the threshold, the two of us, while the station ticked and cooled behind me and a moth beat itself stupid against the lamp. I want to tell you I was calm. I keep a book so I don't have to lie, so I'll say it plain. My mouth went to sand. Out here you hear stories. You hear them from freighters and remittance men and drunks who have never been within 100 miles of an Apache in their lives, and the stories are always the same and always wrong, and I told myself for years I was too sensible a man to carry them. Turns out a story you swallow young sits in you like a stone, whether you believe it or not. My hand found the counter. I did not reach for the rifle. I want that in the book, too. We're closed to the stage till Thursday, I said, which was a foolish thing to say to a man who had clearly not come for the stage. He didn't answer that. He looked at me with eyes so tired they'd gone past color, and when he spoke his English was slow and careful and beautiful in the way a thing is beautiful when someone learned it late and on purpose, one hard word at a time. I am looking, he said, for the woman who writes to the dead. And the whole desert went quiet. Let me take you back, because a thing like that doesn't land right unless you know the ground it falls on. Dry Fork is a relay station on the low road, the one the maps don't bother with anymore. Mesquite and creosote and a wash that runs maybe 4 days a year and kills somebody every time it does. I keep the stock, I keep the well working, I feed whoever the coach drops, and I hold the mail sack between runs because the nearest proper post office is 2 days off, and the company decided years ago it was cheaper to let me play postmaster than to build a real one out here. So I am, in my small way, the door the whole district's letters pass through. Everything that gets sent through me. Everything that comes back to me first. Which is how I came to know Ruth Kessler's grief better than my own. She lived, still lives. Far as I know, 11 miles east on a hardscrabble half-section, her husband broke his back and finally his neck trying to make pay. Amos Kessler. I met him twice before he died. A narrow, stubborn, God-arguing man who'd come west certain the land owed him something and stayed just long enough to learn it didn't. In the fall of '68, there was trouble in the district. There was always trouble in '68. It was that kind of year, the kind where nobody's hands were clean and everybody swore theirs were, and one night it came to the Kessler place. I won't dress it up. Amos was killed. The house was burned to the sills. And their boy, Sammy, 6 years old, small for 6, was gone. Not found dead. That's the whole of the thing right there, the hook that Ruin caught Ruth on and never let go. Not found dead. Gone, they searched. Men rode out for a week, and then for show, and then not at all, and the district settled into its comfortable certainty the way a district does. The boy was dead, poor thing, taken in the raid or lost in the desert, and the desert keeps what it takes. Everybody knew it. Everybody said it, gentle at first and then just tired, the way you say a thing you wish the widow would go on and accept so the rest of you can stop feeling it. Ruth never accepted it, not for 1 hour of 16 years. She rebuilt the place herself, mostly. Ran a few goats and a worse garden and a stubbornness that could have been quarried and sold. And once a month, regular as a debt, she rode her sorrel mule the 11 miles to Dry Fork, and she handed me a letter across this counter, and she said, every single time, the same words. For Samuel, whenever it finds him. The first year I tried to be kind. I tried, gentle as I knew how, to tell her there was nowhere to send it. She looked at me, I'll never forget it, the way you'd look at a child who'd said something too small to bother correcting, and she said, "That's not your worry, Mr. Warwick, that's mine. You just carry it as far as you can." And she left the letter on the counter and rode home. So I carried it as far as I could, which was into the mail sack, where it rode to the sorting office 2 days east and sat, undeliverable, no address, no living recipient, until some clerk who'd never met her and never would stamped it and sent it back to the point of origin, which was me. Dead letter. That's the term. There's a whole trade in them, a whole sad government science of the mail that can't arrive. It comes back to Dry Fork with a purple stamp on it and lands in my hands a second time. And now I'm holding a letter a grieving woman wrote to a dead boy. And I'm supposed to what? Hand it back. Ma'am, the desert declines your correspondence. Burn it and lie to her face. I couldn't do either. God help me, I couldn't do either. So I kept them. There's a trunk in the back room behind the feed. Cedar, good tight lid. Used to hold my father's things and now holds 16 years of Ruth Kessler's letters to her son. Everyone that came back to me I kept. 200 of them near enough I've never counted, and that's a strange gap in a man who counts everything, but I've never once been able to make myself count them. I just lift the lid and lay the new one on top of the drift of old ones and shut it again quick, like something might get out. She never knew. That was the shape of my particular cowardice. I let her believe her letters were out there wandering the country looking for her boy, when the truth was they'd all come home to a cedar box 11 miles from where she wrote them, and the only man who'd ever read the outsides of them was me, not the insides. I want that clear. Whatever else I did, I never once opened one. A man has to keep some line he won't cross, or he's got nothing to steer by. That was the ground. That was the whole 16 years of it, worn smooth as a doorstep. And now here was an old man in my doorway at last light, no horse, dust like a second skin, asking for the woman who writes to the dead. There's no woman here, I said, true enough. She was 11 miles east and it was near dark. But you know her? Not a question. He'd read something in my face. I've since learned he read everything. The man missed nothing, right down to the tremor I was trying to keep out of my hand. I know most everybody on this road, I said. It's a short road. He nodded slowly, like that was fair, like he'd expected a locked door and was only checking the latch. And then he did the thing that changed the evening, changed a good deal more than the evening. He crossed the threshold, 1 step, no more, giving me all the room in the world to raise the rifle if I was going to, and he set something on the counter next to my book. I looked down. It was a button, small, homemade. The kind of thing a woman carves out of a peach pit when she can't spare the coin for tin or bone. You soak the pit and cut it and it takes a shine, and if she's got a steady hand, she'll press a little pattern into the face of it. This one had a pattern, a crosshatch, and a nick out of one edge where the knife had slipped. It sat there on my counter in the lamplight, the color of old honey, and it was the most ordinary object in the world, and I could not for the life of me stop looking at it. Because I'd seen its brothers. I'd seen a coat with buttons just exactly like it once, a small brown coat on a small boy who'd ridden through here on his father's saddlebow the summer before the fall everything went to hell. Ruth made that coat. Ruth carved those buttons. She told me so herself one of those early visits when she still talked, before grief made her spare. She'd carved his buttons from the pits of the peaches off the one tree Amos got to bear before he died. And she'd been proud of it, of the small making of it, in the way of a woman who has learned to be proud of small things because the large ones keep getting taken. I put my hand flat on the counter to steady the whole room. "Where," I said, and my voice came out wrong, "did you get that?" The old man looked at the button, and then he looked at me, and something moved behind his tired eyes that I would spend a long time afterward trying to name and never quite could. Grief, part of it, and something older and stranger sitting under the grief like a stone under water. "From the boy," he said. "He carried it every day of his life, 16 years. He paused, and the moth beat against the lamp, and outside the wash muttered though there'd been no rain the way it does. "He carried it until the day I buried him, and before I put the earth over him, he asked me to bring it home." Now I have to tell you what those words did, because a line in a book can't carry it, and I need you to feel the size of it. 16 years I had known one true thing about Sammy Kessler, and the true thing was that he was dead. Everybody knew it. I kept the letters because I knew it. A man doesn't build a cedar shrine to a live child. My whole tender, useless cowardice was built on the certainty that the boy was gone, and Ruth was writing to a hole in the ground she wouldn't look into. That certainty was the floor I stood on. And this old man, dust and bone, had just said the boy carried it every day of his life. 16 years. Every day of his life. The boy hadn't died in 68. The boy had lived. Somewhere out past the edge of everything the district thought it knew, a small lost boy had grown into a man carrying his mother's peach pit button in his fist, and he had lived a whole life, 16 years of it, and then only recently he had died. And his mother had been writing to him the entire time, not to a ghost, to a living man. The letters that couldn't be delivered had been chasing someone who was actually, breathingly, out there to receive them, and they never once reached him, and he never once knew, and she never once knew, and I sat down. There's a stool behind the counter, and I found it without looking because my legs had quit consulting me. "You're lying," I said. It wasn't an accusation. It was almost a plea, because if he was lying, then my floor was still under me. If he was telling the truth, then I had spent 16 years being kind to a woman in exactly the wrong way, comforting myself that at least her hope was harmless because it couldn't come true. When the whole time it could have, it had been nearly true. A boy had been alive to answer, and I'd been sitting 11 miles from her stuffing her letters in a box. The old man did not take offense at your lying. He was, I would learn, past offense the way he was past color in his eyes. The man had put down most of what a man carries and kept only what he'd promised to carry. He simply lowered himself onto the bench along the wall, careful, one hand going to his side in a way I'd see again and understand later, and he said, "I have walked a long way to lie to you. Give me water and I will tell you the truth, and you will wish I had lied." I got him water. My hands did it while the rest of me sat somewhere back of my own eyes, stunned. I filled the good tin cup and I brought it to him, and he drank it slow, the way a man drinks who has learned exactly how much water he has and exactly how much of the desert is left. And when he set it down empty, he looked at me with those two tired stones of eyes and said, "The woman, she still lives. East of here, 11 miles. She still writes." I thought of the trunk, the drift of paper in the cedar dark, the purple stamps, my particular cowardice aging in the back room like something in a cellar. "Every month," I said, 16 years. Not one of them ever got an answer. And the old man closed his eyes, and something eased out of him and something else settled into him. And when he opened them again, they were wet, which on a face like that, a face carved down to essentials, was a terrible thing to see. "Then I am not too late," he said very quietly, more to himself than to me. "I thought the walk would kill me before the door, but I am not too late. The letters have not been answered." He looked at me, and I swear the whole 16 years was in it. Good, because I have brought the answer. And it has taken me 2 years, and most of what was left of my life to carry it, and I will not give it to anyone but her. Behind him, through the open door, the last of the light went out of the desert all at once the way it does out here. No gentleness to it, and the first star came up hard and white over the mountains. And somewhere a long way off a dog that wasn't a dog started up its evening argument with the dark. I reached for my pencil, old habit, steady the world by writing it down. I opened the book to the day's page and I put the point to the paper and I found I did not know what to write. Name, direction, condition of animals, none of it fit. There was no line in 16 years of that ledger for what had just walked in out of the dusk. So I wrote the only thing that was true. A stranger came with an impossible story. And I believe him, God help me, and now I have to decide whether to tell Ruth, and how much of the truth a person can hold before it stops being mercy and starts being a second grief. Then I shut the book, and I sat with the old man in the dark and the lamplight, and I said, "All right, start at the beginning, tell me how a dead boy grew up." He didn't start at the beginning. He started at the end, which I've come to think is how the very old and the very tired tell a thing from the wound backward, and it took me half the night to learn to follow him. "I buried a son in the spring," he said. "The second son I have buried. The first was a child of my own body, and the ground I put him in is a long way from here, and I do not speak of it." He said this plainly, the way you'd report the depth of a well, and it stopped my breath more than any weeping could have. "The second was not of my body, but he was my son. I want you to understand that first before anything, or the rest will be only a story to you. He was my son. I chose him out of the worst day the world ever gave me, and I never once regretted it, and I buried him in the spring, and now I am here. I want to set down how he told it because it mattered as much as what. He told it slow, with long silences I learned not to fill. He told it without heat, even the parts that had every right to burn. And he told it in that careful, late-learned English, reaching sometimes for a word and not finding it, and going around it another way, so that the whole night had the feel of a man translating not just language but a life, carrying it word by word across a distance, and setting each piece down gently on my counter next to the peach pit button. Here is what he carried across to me that night and into the gray of the morning. I'll tell it the way I finally understood it, not the way it first came. 16 years back, that same fall of '68, that same red year, his people were camped where they'd been told they could camp. I'll be careful here because he was careful here, and because it is not my story to make ornate. There had been an arrangement. A promise from men in uniform that this ground was safe ground, that the killing would pass them by if they stayed put and planted and troubled no one. They stayed put. They planted. And in the last dark before one particular morning, the killing came anyway. He didn't describe it. I want you to notice that because I noticed it, and it told me more about the size of the thing than any description could have. A lesser man or a man with a smaller wound would have made me see it. He didn't. He said, "In the morning I had a wife and 3 children and a father who was old and funny and told the best stories in the camp. By the time the sun was up I had none of them. This is all I will say about that morning. It is enough. It is too much." And he stopped, and the moth had died against the lamp by then and lay on the counter with its wings still, and we sat in it together, the two of us, one who had lost everything on that morning and one who had only heard about that morning second-hand for 16 years and believed the wrong version of it. Because here is a thing I have to confess, and the book demands I confess it. The trouble in the district in '68, the trouble that took Amos Kessler and burned the house and lost the boy. In the district's telling, in my telling, the trouble had a shape, and the shape was Apache. That's the version I'd swallowed young. That's the stone that sat in me when he filled my door. And it was not a lie exactly. Blood ran both directions that year. It always does, but sitting there in the lamplight listening to an old man not describe the morning his whole family was killed by men in uniform on ground they'd been promised was safe. I understood for the first time in my life that I had only ever been handed one half of a two-sided ruin, and I'd built 16 years of certainty on it. That's a hard thing to learn at my age. It's a harder thing to learn from the man your certainty had cast as the villain. So the morning ended. He was alive and did not want to be. And he walked out of the ruin of his life with nothing, meaning to keep walking until the desert finished what the morning had started. And in a dry wash a half-day's walk from the killing ground, under a shelf of rock where something had crawled to hide, he found a boy. A white boy, small for 6. Filthy, sun-blistered, out of his head with thirst past crying, down to that terrible quiet a child goes to when even fear has burned off. How the boy came to be there, half a day from a burned homestead, in a wash in Apache country, the old man never fully knew, and I have never been able to fully reconstruct. And I've stopped trying. because I think the truth of it is just the plain, awful chaos of a night like that one. A boy runs from a burning house into the dark, and the dark is enormous and does not care which people did the burning, and a small pair of legs can carry a terrified child a shocking distance before they quit, and then the child crawls under a rock to be small and waits to be found by whoever finds him. The one who found him was a man who had, that same dawn, lost 3 children of his own to men who looked like this child's people. I looked at him a long time, the old man told me, and this was the part where his voice changed, went down to something worn very thin. I will not tell you my heart was good in that hour. My heart was a burned thing. I looked at this child of the people who, he stopped, chose the word around the wound the way he did. I looked at him and part of me said, leave him. The desert took mine, let it take one of theirs. I am telling you this because it is true, and because if I do not tell you the low part, you will not believe the high part. He was quiet a while, and then the boy opened his eyes and looked at me, and he did not scream. He had no scream left. He looked at me the way, and here the old man made a small helpless gesture with his big cracked hand, the only time all night he reached for something and let me see him fail to find it. He looked at me the way a child looks at the one who is going to decide, and I could not do it. I had lost everything a man can lose. I found I could not add a child to the pile. So I gave him water and I carried him, and I did not decide anything grand. I only did the next thing, and then the next thing, and the next things went on for 16 years and became a son. He named the boy in his own tongue, a name he translated for me as the one the wash gave back. He raised him. Not gently at first, grief isn't gentle and neither is the desert, but faithfully, which the boy needed more. And the boy, who could not have understood a tenth of what had been taken from the man who saved him, gave the old man back day by day, a reason to be up before the sun. He saved me, the old man said. As much as I saved him, more, I pulled him out of a wash. He pulled me out of a grave I had already lain down in. We are even. We were always even. Now here's where it turned strange. Here's where the button and the letters and the whole impossible shape of the thing started to show, and I have to tell it careful, because it's the part that a listener will call too much. And I'll only say, I was there, and I have a book that doesn't lie, and I wrote it down while the old man's water cup was still wet. The boy never remembered, not really. He'd been 6 and out of his head with thirst and half killed with terror, and the mind of a child that young does a mercy on itself. It closes over the worst like water over a stone, and the boy grew up with almost nothing of the life before the wash. No mother's face he could hold, no father, no name of the burned place. It was gone the way the old man's mourning was gone, sealed off. But not everything sealed. 3 things stayed. 3 things the boy carried out of the dark that no amount of years wore off, that the old man watched him keep the way you'd watch a man favor an old wound in the cold. The first was the button, the peach pit button. He'd had it in his fist in the wash. The old man had to pry the small fingers open to give him water, and the button was in there, warm from being held. And when the boy came back to himself enough to know anything, he wanted the button back, and he wanted it back every day after that for 16 years. Wore it on a thong at his neck, held it in his sleep. Never once said whose it was or what it was, because he didn't know. He only knew, the way you know to breathe, that it was his, that it came from before, that it mattered more than anything he could name. The second was a song, wordless, a little humming thing up and down, the kind a woman makes over a cradle when she's got no breath left for lyrics after a long day. The boy hummed it his whole life. Hummed it working, hummed it falling asleep, and never once knew where he'd learned it or that he was doing it. The old man learned it too, second-hand, off his son's own breath, hummed it back to him some nights when the boy was low, and the boy would go quiet and easy hearing it and never understand why. And neither of them ever knew it was a lullaby a woman named Ruth Kessler had made up out of her own tired throat over a cradle in a house that no longer existed. And the third thing is the one I can't get past, the one I turn over at night still. The boy made marks. Grew up making them. On cottonwood bark, on flat stones, on scraped hide, he'd scratch out little rows of marks, careful, patient, and when he'd filled a surface, he'd do a strange thing with it. He'd send it away, set the bark on the wash to float off on the 4 days a year the water ran, leave the marked stones on high places for the wind, put the hide in the fire and watch the smoke take it up. The old man asked him once, when he was a young man, what the marks were. And the boy, who by then was Apache in every way that a life can make a man, who had never seen a schoolroom or a page of print, who could not read one word of any language on this earth. The boy looked at his marks a while, and then said, in the old man's tongue, the closest thing his mouth could make to the truth of it, "I am writing to someone, I don't know who. I have always been writing to them. I send it out so it can find them. Someday it will find them, and they will know I did not stop." I put my head down on the counter when he told me that. I'm not ashamed to write it. A grown man, a station keeper who counts everything and feels as little as he can manage, put his head down on his own counter next to his own book and shook, because 11 miles east a woman had spent 16 years writing letters to a boy and sending them out into a country that couldn't deliver them, saying with everyone, "I did not stop. I did not stop. Someday this will find you and you will know I did not stop." And the boy, the whole same 16 years. 1,000 miles of nowhere between them, had been doing the exact same thing back. Scratching marks he couldn't read to a person he couldn't name and sending them out on the water and the wind and the smoke. 2 people, 1 rope of love cut clean in the middle in the fall of '68. And each of them had spent 16 years standing on their own cut end of it, throwing the frayed rope out into the dark, calling into a silence, certain against all sense that the other end was out there and would someday feel the pull. They never reached each other. Understand that. That's the part that undoes me. Not one of her letters ever reached him. Not one of his marks ever reached her. The distance was too great and the country too wide and the mail too honest. Dead letters go in a box, floated bark sinks or rots. Smoke is just smoke. 16 years of both of them writing straight at each other and the whole desert in between swallowing every word. If you're waiting for me to tell you that a letter got through, that some marked stone found its way to her doorstep, I can't. It didn't. The universe is not kind like that. It's only strange. But strange counts for something. Because here is the last impossible piece, the one the old man told me at the very end of the night with the gray already coming up in the east window, and I'll set it down and let you do with it what you can. The boy had bad nights, all his life. Nights he couldn't sleep, nights something rode him, and on those nights he'd hold the button and hum the song and make his marks by firelight, and he'd tell the old man, "Tonight I have to send one. Tonight they need to hear from me." And the old man, being the kind of man who notices and remembers, being a man with his own book though he kept it in his head, the old man started over the years to keep track of those nights. Not the dates, his people don't count time the way the mail does, but the shape of them. The moon, the turn of the season. And 2 years ago, when the boy took the fever that finally killed him and lay dying slow across a spring, he asked the old man to do the thing he'd never asked before. He asked him to carry the answer out. "Find them," the boy said. "You know the country of the whites. Find the one the marks were for. Tell them I did not stop. Tell them I got every letter." Which was not true. He'd got none of them. He didn't even know they were letters. He only knew in the animal knowing under all knowing that someone had been calling to him his whole life the way he'd been calling to them. "Tell them I heard them," the boy said. "Tell them I was loved every day. Give them back the button so they know it is really me." And then he was gone. And the old man, who had lost a wife and 3 children and a father who told the best stories, who had every reason on this earth to lie down in the spring dirt beside his second buried son and be finished, the old man got up instead. Sick himself by then, the thing in his side that made him touch it careful, that would, I understood by the gray of that morning, likely finish him before another season. He got up, and he took the button, and he walked out into the country of the whites to find a person his son had never named in a district he'd never seen, on nothing but a lullaby and a peach pit button and a shape of nights. It took him 2 years. He walked and he traded work for food and he asked, careful, in the places a man like him could ask, whether anyone knew of a woman who, how do you even ask it, a woman who writes to someone who cannot be written to, a woman who won't stop. And most places looked at him like he was mad, and some places looked at him worse than that, and he kept the button and he kept walking. Until a freighter in a town 2 days east, half drunk and feeling loose with a strange old Apache who'd mended his harness for a meal, laughed and said there was such a woman out on the low road. Everybody knew her. The woman who writes to the desert, rides in every month to fool old Warwick at Dry Fork into mailing letters to her dead boy, been doing it near 16 years. Sad as anything, some folks never do let go. And the old man set down the harness and asked the way to Dry Fork and started walking. He finished telling it as the sun came up. I'd let the lamp burn out sometime in the night and neither of us had noticed, the story its own light. He sat spent on my bench, one hand at his side, and the button lay between us on the counter in the first real daylight. honey-colored, cross-hatched, one nick in the edge where a woman's knife had slipped a long time ago. And I looked at it, and I looked at the old man, and I had, sitting on me like the whole weight of the sky, a decision I did not want. Because I understood now what he'd meant at the door, the thing that had made no sense. I have brought the answer, and you will wish I had lied. The answer was yes. Yes, your son lived. Yes, he carried your button every day. Yes, he loved and was loved. He was somebody's chosen son. He hummed your song to the end. Yes, he was writing to you the whole time, just like you were writing to him. Every impossible hope Ruth Kessler had held against 16 years of the whole district telling her to let go, she'd been right. Right about all of it. Righter than she'd ever dared say out loud. And also, he was dead, 2 years dead. She'd been writing letters to a living man for 14 years and to a fresh grave for 2, and she hadn't known when it changed. There'd been no sign, no moment. The letters had just gone out the same into the same silence. And somewhere in there her boy had stopped being alive to receive them, and she'd gone right on writing. And no one told her because no one knew. Because the only 2 men on earth who knew were an old Apache walking toward her across 2 years of desert, and a station keeper hiding her whole grief in a cedar trunk. You will wish I had lied. I got up. My knees had gone stiff from the long night on the stool. I went to the back room, past the feed, and I stood in front of the trunk a long time in the gray light. Then I lifted the lid, the way I'd lifted it 200 times, quick, like something might get out. Nothing got out. It never had. Just the smell of cedar and old paper and a woman's whole endurance folded into a box by a coward who couldn't bear to burn it and couldn't bear to tell her. 16 years of I did not stop. 16 years of the answer she'd never gotten, sitting 11 miles from where she'd sat writing the questions. I did not decide anything grand. I only did the next thing, the way the old man had taught me a life could be built out of, standing at his son's rock. I picked up the trunk. It was not heavy. Grief weighs less than you'd think, folded. And I carried it out to the front room, and I set it on the counter next to the button. And the old man looked at it and looked at me and understood, the way he understood everything before I said a word. Those are hers, I said. My voice had gone to gravel. Every letter she ever wrote him, they all came back to me. I never had the heart to. I kept them, all of them, 16 years. I never told her. I put my hand flat on the lid. I have to tell her now, both of us do, and I don't know how a person carries this much answer and this much grief in the same breath, but she's owed it. She's owed all of it. So I'm going to hitch the wagon, and we're going to go get Ruth Kessler, and God help the 3 of us. The old man reached out and put his cracked hand on the lid of the trunk beside mine, and for a moment we just stood there, 2 old men and a box of unanswered letters and a peach pit button, with the sun coming up hard through the east window over a desert that had swallowed every word either of these people ever sent and given back in the end, only this: a stranger and an impossible story and the terrible mercy of the truth. Yes, the old man said, let us go and answer her. The 11 miles to Ruth Kessler's place took us the whole morning because I drove the wagon slow. I told myself it was for the old man, whose side was troubling him bad by then, who sat beside me on the board with the trunk roped in the bed behind us, and one hand pressed flat over the pane like he was holding something in. That was part of it. But the truth, and I keep the book so I'll say the truth, is that I drove slow because I did not want to arrive. Every turn of the wheels was carrying a woman closer to the best and worst news of her life, delivered in the same breath, and I was the one holding the reins. And I would have driven that 11 miles for a week if it would have spared her the 2 minutes coming. The old man knew. Of course he knew. Somewhere past the halfway wash he said, not looking at me, you are afraid of her face. Yes, I said. No use lying to a man who'd read me through a doorway in the dark. So am I, he said. And that was all, and somehow it was enough, and I clucked the mule up out of the wash, and we came at last over the low rise, and there was the Kessler place below us. The rebuilt house and the sorry garden and the goats, and a thin figure out among the goats that straightened up and put a hand to its eyes to watch the strange wagon come. She knew something was wrong before we stopped. A woman who's been waiting 16 years for news knows the difference between a wagon that's passing and a wagon that's coming to her. She stood very still by the goat pen with her hand shading her eyes, and she did not come to meet us. And I understood that too. She'd learned, over 16 years, not to run toward things, because things that come to a woman like her have a way of being the wrong things, and she'd built a stillness to take blows in. She took this one standing still. I got down. My legs didn't want to. "Ruth," I said. And then everything I'd rehearsed the whole slow 11 miles went straight out of my head, every gentle, careful word, and I stood there with my hat in my hands like a fool. It was the old man who moved. He climbed down off the board slow, one hand at his side, and he crossed the yard to her, an old Apache man, dust to the knees, walking toward a white woman on a homestead in that district in that year. Which, if you don't know the country, I can't make you feel the size of, the courage of, the thing it was for him to do. And he stopped a respectful distance from her, and he held out his open hand. In it was the button. I watched Ruth Kessler's face do the thing I'd driven 11 miles slow to keep from watching. I watched her eyes go to the button in the stranger's dark hand, and I watched 16 years happen on her face in about 4 seconds. I watched her not understand, and then begin to understand, and then refuse to understand, and then understand anyway because the truth was sitting right there in an open palm, honey-colored, cross-hatched, one nick in the edge where her own knife had slipped a long time ago in a kitchen that no longer stood. I watched her whole stillness, the stillness she'd built to take blows, come apart all at once like a dam going, and there was no sound to it at first. That was the worst of it, no sound at all, just her mouth opening and her hand coming up and no sound. And then she made a noise I will not try to write down because there aren't letters for it. And she went down on her knees in the goat dirt in front of a stranger and reached out and took her boy's button out of his hand. The old man knelt down with her, slow, careful of his side, but he got all the way down into the dirt with her, this dying stranger, so she would not be low and alone. And he closed his big cracked hands around her small one that held the button, and he said the words he had walked 2 years across a desert to say, and he said them in English, careful, each one set down gentle. He lived, your son lived. I found him and I raised him, and he was my son, and he was happy, and he carried this every day, and he never stopped reaching for you, not one day of 16 years. He is gone now. 2 springs ago. I buried him myself, and I am sorry, I am so sorry, I could not save him from the fever, I have not forgiven myself, and I will not. But he sent me to tell you. These were his words, and I have carried them a long way, and I give them to you now exactly as he gave them to me. He drew a breath, and the breath shook. He said, tell them I did not stop. Tell them I heard them. Tell them I was loved every day. I have to stop here and tell you about the letters, because it's where the heaviest thing happened, the decision I still don't know if I made right, and the book says tell it, so I'll tell it. There came a point, after the first storm of it, after Ruth had wept herself down to the flat, exhausted place past weeping, the 3 of us sitting now in her small, clean kitchen with the button on the table between us like a coal. There came a point where she asked the question I'd been dreading worse than her face. Did he get them? She said. Her voice was wrecked, but her eyes were terrible and clear. My letters. I sent him a letter every month. Every month for 16 years I sent it out so it would find him. Mr. Warwick mailed them. She looked at me, and God, she still didn't know. She still thought her letters had spent 16 years wandering the country looking for her boy. Did they find him? Did he ever get even one? And there it was, the heavy thing, because the true answer was no, not one. Her letters had all come home to a cedar trunk 11 miles away. His marks had all sunk and burned and blown to nothing. They never reached each other, not once. The desert ate every word. And she was sitting there with her boy's button in her hand asking me, the man who'd kept her letters in a box and never told her, whether her 16 years of writing had ever once landed. I looked at the old man. The old man looked at me. And I understood that between us we held 2 answers, and only one of them was kind, and that the kind one was a lie, and that I had spent 16 years already choosing the kind lie of the cedar trunk, and look what it had done. Look at the woman it had left writing into the dark alone. I was so tired of the kind lie, and I was so afraid of the true answer. And the old man who did not lie, who had walked 2 years to bring an answer specifically because it was true, the old man spoke first. And I have thought about what he did every day since. And I still can't tell you if it was a lie or the deepest truth I've ever heard. And I've decided it doesn't matter, that the 2 ran together in him the way grief and love ran together, the way they'd run together his whole ruined, faithful life. He said he got every one. Ruth went still. I could not read your marks, the old man said, and he could not read them either, and I will not sit in your house and pretend a letter crossed the desert on paper, because that is not what happened, and you are owed the truth. So here is the truth, and it is stranger than paper. Every night you wrote to him, I watched him, 1,000 miles away. On the nights something rode you to sit down and write, something rode him to sit down and answer. He could not have known. He did not know your name or your face, but he knew the way a child knows its mother's step in the dark that someone was calling him, and on those nights he would say to me, "Tonight they need to hear from me," and he would make his marks and send them out on the water and the fire, and he would be at peace. He felt you. Every month for 16 years across all that country, he felt you reach for him, and he reached back. The paper never crossed, but you crossed. You reached him every single time. He told me at the end, "Tell them I got every letter, tell them I heard them," and I did not understand how that could be true when no paper ever came, and I have walked 2 years thinking about it, and now I am old and dying, and I have decided I understand it after all. The letters were never the paper. You know this. You have always known this. That is why you kept writing when everyone told you to stop. Some part of you always knew he was out there feeling you right, and you were right. You were right the whole time, and the whole world was wrong. He got everyone. And Ruth Kessler put her face in her hands over her boy's button and wept. But it was a different weeping now, and I have never in my life seen grief and grace change places in a person the way they changed places in her at that kitchen table, and I will carry the sight of it to my own grave. Now, was that a lie? On the plain facts, the paper facts, the mail and dead letter facts, the facts a man like me who counts everything is supposed to hold to, no letter crossed. That is a fact. But I sat in that kitchen and watched the old man's stranger truth land on that woman and do what 16 years of the district's kind facts had never done. It set her down. It let her stop. And I've come to believe he wasn't lying at all. I've come to believe he'd found, dying, walking, the one thing that was truer than the paper. That two people who spend 16 years each throwing love into a silence toward each other are, in the only way that finally counts, reaching each other every time, and the desert can eat the paper, but it cannot eat that. It never once could. He got everyone. God help me, I think it's true. The trunk I did not bring in at first. It sat roped in the wagon bed through all of it, through the button and the weeping and the stranger truth, and only at the very end, when the sun was going down again, a whole day gone in that kitchen, the longest and shortest day of my life, did I go out and unrope it and carry it in and set it on Ruth Kessler's table, and tell her at last my own true thing. "These are yours," I said. "Every letter you ever gave me came back to me undeliverable, and I couldn't send them, and I couldn't burn them, and I couldn't tell you, so I kept them. 16 years. I'm sorry, Ruth, I was a coward. I let you believe they were out there, and the whole time they were in a box in my back room, and I don't know if that was mercy or cowardice, and I've decided it was both, and I'm sorry. I waited for her anger. I'd earned it. I'd have taken it gladly. She didn't give me anger. She lifted the cedar lid quick, the way I always had, like something might get out, and she looked down at 16 years of her own hand, the drift of folded paper, every I did not stop she'd ever sent into the dark come home to her kitchen at last. And she put her hand down into the letters the way you'd put your hand into a stream, and she looked up at me, and she looked at the old man, and she said the thing that finished me. Then he can have them now. She looked at the old man. You said you buried him. You said you couldn't forgive yourself, and you won't. She was gathering the letters up in her arms as she spoke, all of them, 16 years, holding them to her chest. You're going to forgive yourself because you raised my son when I couldn't, and you loved him every day I couldn't, and you gave him a father when the world took his, and you walked 2 years dying to bring him home to me. There's nothing to forgive. There's only, her voice broke and she pushed through it. You take these back. You take every letter I ever wrote him, and you carry them to wherever you buried him, and you put them in the ground with him, or you burn them over the grave. I don't care which, you'll know which. And then he'll have them, 16 years of them, all at once. He'll have every word. She was crying again and smiling both, that terrible human both. He got everyone, you said, then let him have them to keep. The old man looked at the woman holding out 16 years of letters to a dead boy, asking him to carry them one more impossible distance. And something happened to his carved-down face that I don't have the skill to render. He took the letters. He held them the way you hold a sleeping child. And he bowed his head over them, this old dying stranger, in a white woman's kitchen at the end of the longest day. And he said something in his own tongue, low, that he did not translate, and I did not ask him to, because some things a man says over a grief are not for the book. He died at Dry Fork 11 days later. He'd meant to start back, to carry the letters the 2 years home, and put them in the ground with his son the way she'd asked. But the thing in his side had its own schedule, and it turned out the walk that killed him was the one he'd already made. He weakened fast after Ruth's kitchen, as if the answer had been the only thing holding him up, and now that it was delivered, his body was free to be done. I kept him at the station. Ruth came and stayed, and the two of them sat together those last days in a peace I can't explain. the mother and the man who'd raised her son, and sometimes she'd hum the wordless song and his eyes would close, and I'd have to go out to the stock so they wouldn't see my face. He asked near the end that the letters go in the ground with him since he could no longer carry them to the boy. "Bury them with me," he said, "and when I get to wherever my son is and I am going there, I have felt him waiting these 2 years, I will hand them to him myself. Every one. Tell her I will put them in his hands." And Ruth, sitting by him, said she'd tell her, meaning herself, and they both smiled at that, the small joke of it, and it was the last time I saw him laugh. We buried him behind the station, up on the little rise where you can see the whole low road come and go. Ruth put 16 years of letters in with him, the whole cedar trunk laid it in gentle. And on top of the trunk at the last moment she set the peach pit button, the boy's button that had crossed the whole desert twice now, so that the old man could carry it back to the son he'd carried it away from. Full circle. I argued with her about the button. I said it was her only piece of Sammy, the only thing she had, she should keep it. She looked at me the way she'd looked at me 16 years before across the counter, the way you look at a child who said something too small to correct. "It was never mine to keep, Mr. Warwick," she said. "It was only ever going home. I keep a book. I wrote the old man's line in it the night he died, and I found I could not spell his name. He'd given it to me once that first night, and I'd tried. And I'd got it wrong then, and I got it wrong in the book, and I've left it wrong, because a man who spent his life learning our hard words one at a time deserves better than my bad spelling of his, and I'd rather leave the gap honest than fill it false. So there's a line in my ledger dated with the name left blank and only this after it. A stranger came with an impossible story, and it was true, and it set a woman free, and it cost him the last of his life to bring it, and I do not know how to spell what he was, so I will not try. Buried on the rise. Direction, home. Ruth doesn't ride in every month anymore. There's no more letters to send. He got everyone, he's holding them now wherever he is. But she comes sometimes out to the rise, sits up there a while where you can see the whole road, hums if the wind's the right way to carry it off. And I notice things, it's my sickness that she stopped watching the road the way she used to, that hungry way, watching for the thing that never came. She just sits now, easy, like a woman who's finally had her answer and can rest in it. There's one more thing. I've held it for the end because I don't know what to do with it, and maybe that's the honest place to leave it. That last night when the old man was going, he pulled me down close and told me something he hadn't told Ruth, and made me promise to hold it until I knew what it was for. He said the boy, her son, had grown up and taken a wife among the people, and they'd had a child before the fever came. A daughter. She'd be, the old man reckoned, about 8 years old now. Out there. Ruth's granddaughter. Carrying the boy's blood and the old man's raising, and the old man said, the same song, he'd heard the little girl hum it, the wordless up and down song, learned off her father's breath the way her father learned it off a mother he couldn't remember. She does not know she has a grandmother, the old man whispered, and the grandmother does not know she has her. And I am dying before I can carry that letter too. His hand tightened on mine, the last of his strength in it. Someone will have to, someday, tell me you'll. I told him I would.